Well, once back on the tow, I had a good look at Milo again, and you know, I just couldn't figure it out. I just had no front tail shaft power at all. It didn't seem as if the selector was stuck. Everything seemed okay. Must have been an internal fault. It really must have. But that's all right, because I got home with two-wheel drive and I was able to get over to Sunshine State and pester my old mate Steve with some more of those crazy parts descriptions. Your worst nightmare.
Hey, good to see you again, Ruthie. You need more parts, eh?
Oh, it's all guesswork from here, really, except for one thing. Steve is a mechanic. Well, he used to be a mechanic, so he knows pretty much what I'm on about. And of course, with all that Toyota experience behind him and all Terrain Tamer's parts shelves to go by, he's got a fair idea of what I'm going to need to fix this truck. Terrain Tamer parts are great too, because they've put the whole lot together in kits. So, you know, there's a transfer kit, there's a clutch kit, there's a this kit, a that kit, a bearing kit, and you get the seals and the gaskets and everything else you need to do that job. So between the two of us, 90% him and 10% me, I've got a fair chance of walking out here with the bits I need to sort this out. Well, by now you've seen what happened on that really wet day down at the Springs, but I reckon I'm one of the luckiest blokes in Australia, because I get to call on Alan Gray, and Alan Gray is the most experienced Land Cruiser mechanic in Australia in sheer terms of years as well as knowledge. At one stage he ran a business called Mr. Land Cruiser, and of course Alan used to work on the Toyotas for Teese Brothers when they first came into Australia. That makes you about 130, doesn't it, mate?
Oh, at least. Yeah, you're catching up to you.
Yeah, catching up to me, yeah. But look, you know, for a bloke like me who's never trained as a mechanic but always done it and absolutely loves it, there's nothing better than working with someone who really knows what they're doing. And Alan's here to crack the whip on me. I think I've got a busted transfer. What do you reckon it might be?
Well, have a look at the footage where you hit that big rock and the noise come out of it. I could hear it on the video. I'm not sure. I think it's jumped out of gear somehow and sort of half engaged.
Yeah.
We'll need to pull the transfer case down, have a look at it. But we'll do it on the side of the road sort of thing, not with all the fancy presses. We'll do it as you're doing it.
This is bush mechanic style. No presses, nothing fancy, but at least we got a roof over our heads, because it still hasn't stopped raining for the last week. Right, let's get into it. Okay, thanks, Alan.
Right, okay.
It's pretty important to me to know how to fix things without all the fancy special tools. I guess as much as anything, that's because it's pretty rare that I have any fancy special tools. I mean, even an impact wrench, you know, you can get around having one of those in the bush a whole lot of ways, apart from a brick and chisel, that is. And so what we're going to do is pull the transfer out while it's still in the truck, pull it to bits, which is pretty much what you do in the bush, and then we're going to put it back together, hopefully, without the aid of any special tools. You might notice here one little special technique getting used, and that's the shifter on the big nut on the drive shaft. We're using the starter motor with the truck in gear to spin that off, because it's a nylock lock nut. It's a pain in the butt to get off if you don't do it that way. So bit by bit the old transfer's coming to bits, and we're getting our hands nice and oily and getting in there. Talking oil, that was a good shower. And this is the clutch mechanism, the dog clutch, that is where we thought the problem would be. I was half expecting to find that completely shredded, but it wasn't at all, which was a bit of a worry, because that meant we had to go deeper and deeper and keep looking. Transfer case does a fairly amazing job when you think about it. It takes all the power that's come through the gearbox and then it splits it into the drive for front and back.
So you were telling me that when you're going up this hill, suddenly you hit this great big rock, boom, you hit a noise. Now I'll see if I can reproduce the noise. What I've done here, pull the insides of it out and just get the four-wheel drive section in there so as we can try it. Now that's in two-wheel drive only, the front tail shaft.
So that's functioning all right?
Spinning. So you just pull that, that's what happens when we select four-wheel drive, front-wheel drive.
Now it's working now.
That's locked together. Okay, but I think what you heard probably was just turn that shaft down.
That's it. That's the noise, Alan.
Okay. Well,
so it was knocked out of...
I'd say it was knocked out of gear with a big bump and the movement of the front diff probably. And we've got to look inside because sometimes if you've got big heavy underfelt or something around the lever, you can actually, it'll hit it half out of gear and it'll feel firm, but you'll get that bad noise. Now I don't think we've got any trouble here because there's a whole lot of teeth just grating there. We'll have a look inside it again. That's the noise.
I'm going to spend the rest of the day trying to find something wrong with this because this has been an awful lot of work if that's all it was. I did try this. I should point out, and I better mention it to you, Alan, before you think I'm a total goose. I did try several different things to get it back into low range.
Yeah, but you're on a pretty dramatic hill, aren't you?
I was propped on a bit of a hill.
Yeah, sometimes it's very difficult to get in there covered in mud.
I really didn't want to play with it on that hill.
But some of the bearings, although it's nice and clean inside because you've changed the oil, some of the bearings have got little pit marks on them. We'll put a set of bearings in it, we'll put it back together carefully and just try it.
Just one thing here, Alan mentioned to me before, what was it, 90%?
I reckon 50 to 70% of our gearbox and transfer case overhauls are caused by oil not being changed regularly.
Yeah.
The oil after say 20,000 kilometres it turns to varnish. It's just like no lube, it's fluid but it's not lube, and it coats everything and there's no lube at all and it just wears things out.
Now you can actually see this. You can see this in old oil. You know that really horrible black varnishy looking sort of a colour?
Brown oil.
Yeah, brown oil. That's dead oil. It really is. And you can smell it too. There's no lubrication left in it. That's what destroys things. So even though I might be a total goose on the I didn't bust something level, at least Alan's got something nice to say about the fact that the oil's been changed plenty of times in the last 12 years.
Yeah, you can see the inside coating of that, it's nice and clean.
Yeah.
But I've pulled them down sometimes where the cover is exactly the same as that gasket. You can't wash it, it's in everything and it's worn out the splines as well. Heavy cost. In your case, just bearings and we'll put it back together.
Bearings and she's back together.
There we go.
Back on the road.
All right.
Let's go.
Okay, mate.
It's funny, isn't it? You can say it a million times and people still don't listen. But at the end of the day, regular oil changes with good oil makes all the difference. It's the cheapest insurance policy you can have. Now, I know a lot of my mates tend to be very good at engine oil changes and filter changes on the motor, but they also tend to just leave the gearbox alone on the old principle that, hey, if it's not broken, why bother? Boy, it's helpful having a dog around sometimes, isn't it? It's not good enough though, is it? Really? Not good enough at all. You need to change your transfer oil, your gearbox oil and your diff oil at least once a year or once every couple of years. Come on. It's not that expensive really, and it's going to save you an awful lot of work. You'll notice we're not using anything much beyond screwdrivers and hammers and bits and pieces found around the shed, like an old shaft here and there, an old bearing. Did have the advantage of the gas torch though, by crikey. Probably could have done that in the bush though. There are ways of doing that. You can see, you know, we don't even have a bearing press here. We're just putting in the race using a socket and some gentle hammering, which is all right. You can do things like this. You don't need the special tools. What you do need is a huge amount of common sense and a little bit of knowledge as to what's going to crack and what isn't. Just look at it. If it's going to crack, stop. In that case, we're using an old bearing to drive a new bearing in. It's fairly simple and it's exactly the right size. And here we're coating a gasket that's broken with a little bit of silicone. I like to use a little bit of silicone even on a new gasket, just on one side of it, and then I'll lightly oil the other side. And that way, next time I pull it to bits, well, if I have to, I can put it back together without a new gasket. Here we go again, using the starter motor to tighten up the bolt. It's a handy trick that, but you want to know what you're doing. Using grease to hold a spacer in place is a very old mechanic's trick, and it works every time too. It's a good way of holding rollers into races and all sorts of tricks. I've just got half a feeling that having been in here once, I'll need to be in here again at some stage in the future. In fact, even though Alan's here helping me with this, that's one of the bush mechanics rules. Whatever you fixed last time is probably going to break again at some stage in the future. So carry a few bits and pieces to sort it out and you'll be right. I hope Alan didn't hear me say that.